Hello, my name is John Schaefer. I'm from the Ministry of Sailing. Once again, we want to talk about the next phase, which is module number 2 of the Sailing Rescue Swimmer Certification process. Currently, you're familiar with this book. You should have read it through, and it should be really solidified in your brain of what we're talking about when it comes to the actions needed. For the learning objectives for module number 2, we're going to really talk about the needs to demonstrate some specific skills. So the learning objectives for this one are the 5 phases, which are going to be utilized for the deployment of a rescue swimmer. The task organization. We're talking about 3 different scenarios where a rescue swimmer should be deployed. The importance of conducting after-action reviews. Key elements that differentiate a rescue swimmer briefing from maybe a traditional briefing you might be used to before racing or even just cruising. How to create a safety ethos on a vessel, the aspects of a constant briefing technique, which is really going to be important for any sailing vessel, whether you have a rescue swimmer or not, the impact of water temperature on a person who is in the water, the role the navigator plays while dealing with a crew overboard scenario, and the use of a pan-pan and Mayday radio call when a person is in the water during a crew overboard scenario. There are 5 phases for the deployment of the rescue swimmer. The first one is going to be the preparation and planning. Number 2 is the assessment of the situation. The third one is going to be your approach and how you deploy the rescue swimmer. The fourth is the rescue operation and the care, and the fifth is the hot wash and the sharing of the information. It's just going to be important so other people can learn. Phase 1, preparation and planning of deployment. The skipper or watch captain direct the safety preparation prior to leaving the dock. Task organization and preparation includes the establishment of constant communications with the rescue swimmer, identifying the ready halyards that will be available for a rescue. The decision actually to deploy the rescue swimmer really has to come between the rescue swimmer and with input from the watch captain and the captain. So that's going to be really crucial on who's going to deal with the crew overboard situation on that. And then with any crew overboard situation, the rescue swimmer begins with suiting up. So as soon as a person splashes and hits the water in a crew overboard situation, that's the moment that a rescue swimmer has to start suiting up or getting ready to put on the equipment, and the crew has to be ready with the possible use of a rescue swimmer. And the reason is because although a person might be okay in the water when they first enter the water, as time goes by, their situation is going to continually deteriorate into a situation where they may not be able to help themselves. And so the initial assessment might include that a rescue swimmer is not needed, but that situation in the assessment could change, that it might turn out later that the person is needed. And so when a person can no longer help themselves, the rescue swimmer doesn't need to put on the equipment then. It should be ready to be used at all times, depending on what the scenario is going to be. The second phase of deploying a rescue swimmer is the rapid assessment. Assessing the person in the water, you need to understand what their well-being is. You could see what that is as they go by the boat or as you have that first initial thought looking at them. The second one is, what type of personal protection equipment do they have? Do they have a PFD on? You need to know the scenarios that you're looking at based upon speed, based upon current, based upon wind, based upon weather, based upon maneuverability, based upon the boat. You're also going to have to do an assessment of what personal protection equipment that person has on as well. The next thing you need to look at when you're talking about an assessment of the person in the water, it's going to include a scenario. Is the person conscious? And does the conscious person have PP, personal protection equipment? Or don't they have personal protection equipment on? Or if they are three different scenarios with one variable based on the three scenarios. The first scenario you're going to be talking about when a person is in the water or a crew overboard situation is going to be a person who's in the water who is conscious with personal protection equipment or a PFD. Here's the scenarios you're going to have to deal with when you make an assessment. First scenario is going to be a conscious person with personal protection equipment, a person who is without personal protection equipment who's in the water, and then finally you have an unconscious person who's in the water with personal protection equipment. If it's an unconscious person in the water, you're going to handle that scenario as the same as a conscious person in the water, because your reaction time and your procedures are going to be much different than the procedures elsewhere. And our next modules will actually go into that in depth when we talk about the procedures for how to place a rescue swimmer into the water and the actions that are going to be needed to mitigate those risks and control those risks the best as possible. When we're talking in this phase, we're talking about when you have the person in the water. You know, when we go back to the earlier phase about the preparation before you actually put people on the boat, it's going to be really important that everybody has all the gear set up the exact same way. The spray hood, the leg straps, the knife, the light, the tethers, they should all be the exact same setup. So when the rescue swimmer goes in, he knows exactly the setup for every person that's in the water. This is going to be very, very crucial when it comes to recovering a person who's in the water. Hopefully we never go that way. Hopefully we never have that. But we're setting things up now for the most successful rescue we possibly can, even before we get on the boat. And so the next phase from that is, you know, we're talking about the approach. What approach is the boat going to take based upon what that equipment's going to be? The final point we want to make in the second phase of the rapid assessment is to understand what the conditions are. We really need to talk about the instinctive drowning response, the IDR response, which we have in the book. Read that special chapter that's really based upon on the annex. It's important to understand that you might run yourself into a first chance, last chance situation when you identify a person who might be about to drown, whether they have a vest on or not. It might be the first chance, last chance. And if any crew identifies that type of first chance, last chance, they need to scream that out so everybody knows that we need to deploy the rescue swimmer immediately. And again, that goes to the first point is, as soon as you have a person in the water and you have a qualified rescue swimmer on board, that rescue swimmer has to have the gear and has to be preparing themselves to go into the water. Phase 3 is going to be how the vessel approaches the person in the water, and then how you would deploy the rescue swimmer. The rescue swimmer will make the recommendations to the captain and the best way to position the vessel when it comes to the recovery of the person in the water to affect some sort of positive outcome. But then it's the skipper, it's going to be the watch captain, it's going to be the rescue swimmer, and the crew that actually communicate the strategy, all right, on how we're going to do that to the rest of the crew so everybody knows what the expectations are. So that phase 3, that approach and the deploying of the rescue swimmer, when it comes to the actual putting the rescue swimmer in the water, that's the most critical decision, and everybody has to understand how they're going to do it. They have to be trained on how to do it, and most likely you're going to be able to work out the intricacies in order to affect a positive outcome. All right, phase 4 is the rescue and the aftercare, the actual retrieval of both persons, the rescue swimmer and the person in the water, onto the vessel. That final hoist of retrieving both sailors. Again, later on we will go into the techniques on how to actually do that with the procedures, but that assessment of both sailors now needs to happen. It's not just the person that was in the water, but also you have to do an assessment on the rescue swimmer, and that's mostly because the amount of time that person is in the water, they may also be experiencing effects of impact of the water on their own persons. Additionally, you know, when you have that person that goes in the water, you're going to bring them close to the hull, and as we're bringing them both close to the hull, you know, you're going to have impact on the hull with both individuals. So that's why the personal protection equipment that we put on the rescue swimmer, the helmet, you know, the type of vest that we use, that really prevent that impact of these people when they might be hitting against the hull is very important to pay attention to. But you're going to be talking about the assessment in terms of, hypothermia, how you're going to mitigate the hypothermia, the mental confusion. How do you do an assessment on what's happening to the people that are there in the water? And then you have to start at the same time. Once you have them on the boat, the person who's in charge of the communication might begin starting some sort of medical evacuation procedure as well. The final phase, phase number 5, is your hot wash or the after action review. This comes in like 2 cycles. Number 1, the immediate one. The immediate one is what went wrong that placed a person in the water. You want to immediately do that once you recover your person on board, because you don't want the situation to happen again. Whatever those circumstances were that put a person on board, we need to modify behavior for the rest of the crew, modify equipment, fix equipment, whatever that situation was, we need to remedy it immediately so we don't have that happen again. And then later, you can do a post-incident, a real hot wash, an after-action review, which discusses the ways that we can prevent this from happening. And then we want to share that information with the community so nobody else has to have this situation again. We're going to learn every single time we send a rescue swimmer off the boat. And then at the Ministry of Sailing, since we're the certification body, we want to collect that information, send it out to our rescue swimmers, so every time we have an incident, we can recover that information and share it to the community as a whole. After we talk about the 5 phases of a rescue swimmer, we're going to be talking about how to create a safety ethos. And in this chapter right here, we're really starting to talk about the breathing of the safety ethos and boat readiness and crew readiness. Now, earlier chapter we discussed the definition of crew and readiness, or the continuing echo or resounding sound, like, hey, we're on a port tack right now, and so the red halyard on this lock is the one that's going to be used for safety. Then we have to talk about the safety that's constantly being monitored to develop a safety ethos. When somebody actually recognizes unsafe behavior, you, as the rescue swimmer, should be able to immediately call that out, say that was unsafe, we need to come back together and do it the right way. So you have to constantly modify behavior in order for you to have a very safe crew and to keep things going safe on the boat. And then that constant safety briefing. From this tack, if you change halyards, that the ready halyard for rescue is going to be a different halyard, that has to be communicated to the entire crew. And then when you do a shift change, it's the exact same thing. The rescue swimmer and the watch captain have to identify and pass over that this is the ready halyard, ready to be used if we have to do a rescue, if we need to deploy a rescue swimmer. The halyard is a very critical tool in using a rescue swimmer. If you don't have a halyard, the likelihood of using a rescue swimmer is very, very low. And so you will not be able to control those risks. So each peel, each tack, each jibe, there needs to be a constant mantra of a safety ethos. Develop this on the boat. A safety briefing that the configuration of the vessel has changed, and if we have a person in the water, if there is a crew overboard, and we mean crew overboard meaning your person in the water could be your person or another person that you need to rescue. It's really important to have this constant safety communication, not just before you go sailing, but through the entire trip. Every tack, every jibe, every sail change, every time something is different on the vessel, we need to keep this safety communication going. All right, one of the things you're going to see right here in the vessel, we're talking about the hypothermia chart. It's really important to understand that a person who's in the water in 50 to 60 degree temperature of water has an immobility rate about 1 hour. 1 hour of exposure time in the water, and they will not be able to help themselves. After a few hours after that, they're going to be incapacitated altogether. So part of your briefing before you even go into water is to understand, and it needs to include, what is the water temperature when you're sailing. Because this is going to give us an opportunity as rescue swimmers to understand how much time we have to turn the vessel around. And once we make an approach, we need to know that that person may or may not be able to help themselves when it comes to recovering. The navigator plays a critical role when it comes to crew overboard situations. You know, the first thing they have to do, somebody has to do, is hit the button which identifies the exact position that we have a crew overboard situation. On some vessels, it's right at the helm. If you're on competition Volvo 65s, Volvo 70s, there's a button right at the helm that everybody can hit. Any crew member can hit the crew overboard button. The navigator then will determine the course, the search pattern, will communicate available radio and satellite communications that are there, record the crew overboard situation, and here's what's really important. It's important to write that position down on a piece of tape, on a piece of paper. Write it down so anybody can pick that piece of paper up and relay those coordinates where the crew overboard situation happened. It's going to be critical because not everybody, with all the digital screens that you might have or displays in the nav station, not everybody will be able to look for that exact location. So writing it down physically on a piece of tape, and yeah, use your e-tape, use your electrical tape. Write it with your black mark, you know, your magic marker, your Sharpie, put it on there, tape that down, star it, MOB, COB, whichever terminology you're using. Write that down so everybody understands this is the location of the COB. That way, if somebody's asking where it is, you don't have to find it on a particular machine. If you're using one of these, it doesn't make any difference. You can immediately write it down. You can immediately start relaying these coordinates to other people that might be able to help. So you're going to ask yourself this question. If you have a person who's in the water, a crew overboard or a man overboard situation that happened on your boat, do you call pan or do you call Mayday? Here's a very simple rule of thumb. If you can see the person in the water, use a pan. If you can't see the person in the water, probably you're going to want to use a Mayday because you do not know where that person is, so you need help from a lot of different persons other than just yourselves. And then finally, you're going to have to make a radio call when you put your rescue swimmer in the water. Here's the reason. You have a rescue swimmer here and you have a vessel here. In between here is a rescue line. This means you need to identify a person is attached to a rescue line for those other boats that might be trying to help or other boats that might be in the vicinity. You need to tell them, just like placing a diver in the water, if they have a dive flag, you need to identify that you're placing a second person in the water besides the crew overboard, just to protect your person the best you can. And that's going to be a radio call. So here's what the radio call would sound like. It would be a pan. This is the vessel velocity. We are deploying a rescue swimmer and performing rescue operations. We are doing this within 6 miles south-southeast of Red Doghouse Light. Please approach with caution. The rescue swimmer has a red vest on. He has a helmet on. He has personal protection equipment and reflective gear. Thank you very much. Please use caution while approaching the sailing vessel velocity. Pan.